Hello and welcome back to revise GCSEhistory.co.uk, the number one place for your GCSE history revision. This is video 4 in the topic Law and Order in the West, and it's actually the last video in this topic. In the video today we're going to be looking at the forces of law and order in the West. Let's make a start. So before we begin to look at the forces of law and order, what types of crime were there in the West? We spoke about how wild the West was, but what type of crimes actually happened? So there was bank robberies, cattle rustling, horse stealing, claim jumping, fence cutting. Sorry, we've said that claim jumping is when miners steal people's claims to gold or claims to successful mines, fence cutting, racial attacks because of ethnic differences, shootings, train robbery, and also there were people called road agents or highwaymen, and they were people that jumped out at travellers as they were travelling down roads and just robbed them. We'd probably call it mugging today. So road agents, they called them that then, or you can sometimes call them highwaymen. So those are some examples of the types of crime that happened in the West. So we're going to look at the first force of law and order. So the vigilantes are a force of law and order. A force of law and order. So let's have a look at these. Vigilantes were people who took the law into their own hands. They drove suspected criminals out of town, or lynched them. Lynched them's just to hang them. You can see from this picture here that a man's been hung from the gate of an open range bit of fencing. So, sorry, from like a cattle ranch, what am I on about? So, lynching is just hanging. So that's when they were hanged. In the early days, it took time for law and order to get established in new towns. Took time. Sheriffs were often badly paid, and criminals could pay them off because they took bribes. So, in the early days, vigilantes helped when there was no alternative. Helped some people, but usually they added to the problem by accusing and punishing the wrong people. So often there was a blurred line between the vigilantes and the criminals, and also they didn't give vigilantes didn't give their suspects a fair trial because they instantly lynched suspected criminals or drove them out of town. They didn't let them have their say and only listened to one side of the story. So very often the vigilantes were worse than the criminals, and they sometimes accused and punished the wrong people. So that's one sort of force of law and order, vigilantes, and that's not it's not an official force of law and order. That's just people taking law and order into their own hands when there was no alternative. And sometimes successful, but very often it just made things worse. So let's have a look at some actual force of law and order. The first we're going to look at is town marshals, and they were appointed by the people of a town on a yearly basis. US marshals, they were appointed by the president to oversee a state or territory. The marshals also appointed deputies who worked on a more local basis, obviously because one US marshal couldn't oversee an entire state or territory because the area was too vast and there were too many people living there, so deputies were appointed who worked with people more locally. There were also sheriffs, and they were elected by the people of a county for a 2-year period. They had to cover too wide an area to be effective. So what I mean by this is sheriffs were not actually very effective because the area they had to cover and the area they had to work with was too big for them to be of any use. They were also a force called the Texas Rangers, and they were a small army of lawmen employed to enforce law in the state of Texas. So that's an example of another private law and order force. So there's some more force of law and order here. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, and that's a private... Oh dear, I'm missing out my A's on these, aren't I? That's a private company. So the Pinkerton Detective Agency is a private company hired by banks and railroad companies to provide protection. Sometimes the agency was hired to catch particular outlaws. Another force of law and order was judges, and they were appointed by the president to try cases. There were sometimes 3 to supervise each state or territory, and this was too few. There were simply not enough judges. And this meant that prisoners were sometimes lynched before a fair trial could take place. Because of sort of the long waiting time for prisoners to be tried, they were very often lynched without a trial. It's just worth saying that few men made a career out of being a lawman, since it was badly paid and very dangerous also. Okay, so we've actually gone through all of the knowledge we need to cover for this video today on the forces of law and order in the West. But here, as we usually have, are 4 quick questions based on all the content we've covered in today's video. Pause the video here if you want, scribble down some answers to check you've picked up on the key points. If not, carry on watching and we'll simply discuss them together. So the answers to the questions. Question 1, give 2 examples of crime in the West. One you could have had was cattle rustling. Another crime that you could have had was train rob. What have I done? Another one that you could have had was train robbery. There are just 2 examples that I can think of. There are many more. Check back to the earlier slide to check your answers were valid. The second question, who were the vigilantes and what did they do? They took the law into their own hands, and what they did is they drove people out of town or lynched them. That's what the vigilantes did. So, what did judges do as a force of law and order? Let's have a look. What did the judges do? The judges were appointed by the president, and they tried cases, giving people a trial to try cases. Sorry, it's a bit scribbly this writing today. Question 4. What did US Marshals do as a force of law and order? Well, they were also appointed by the president. And their role was to oversee a state or territory. There we are. Alright, there are the answers to these 4 quiz questions. Thanks for watching this video today. I do hope that you found it useful. If you have, visit my website revisegcsehistory.co.uk to view more revision videos like this on Medicine Through Time and the American West for your GCSE history course. Thanks for watching, see you soon, good luck with your studies. The next videos we're going to be doing are on the Indian Wars. Thank you.